Hello and welcome back in Zurich. My name is Leda Thun and I am here with Brigitte Umbach-Spahn from Wenger Plattner, Attorneys at Law. Ms. Umbach-Spahn, you have been with Wenger Plattner for over 20 years now. What have you learned as a lawyer during that time?
I think when I started, I thought law is the most important part of being a lawyer. Now I would say law is a toolkit. And what is equally important is getting to really know the needs of your client, understanding the facts, and thoroughly try to find really good solutions for the problems of the client. In the restructuring field, time is often short, so experience is quite important when you advise a client. And I feel that the more complex and interrelated the topics get, it's important that you work in teams, that in a team you come up with creative solutions. I had the luck at the beginning of my career to have a mentor, a partner who shared a lot of his experience with me, and I still feel that that helped a lot in me trying to find my way forward.
So working as an attorney is like teamwork?
Working as an attorney in the kind of cases I do is very much teamwork. I hardly ever do any case just on my own. Typically, we are 3-4 lawyers on advising cases, and if I act as an office holder, it can be up to 10 or 15 in my team.
So your work evolves around insolvency and restructuring. What do you think is the mistake that you often see in companies when they get insolvent?
I think it's most likely not only one mistake. Okay. It's a mix of several mistakes in most cases. It's a combination of structural differences, of strategic shortcomings, and then at a certain point in time followed by financial difficulties. And speaking about financial difficulties, I think what is always a real red flag and warning sign is if there is a shortage in liquidity. In restructuring, and I think we come to that, cash is king. So if cash becomes short, the time you have to find solutions, to develop alternatives, get shorter and shorter. That's certainly always a warning sign. And to be a little bit more concrete concerning the facts which can cause an insolvency. I mean, if a company in distress doesn't follow the future needs of their clients and kind of cannot make it up with the market around, the market players and competitors, that certainly can be a factor. For example, if they miss technical developments. Another reason we sometimes see is in family-owned businesses where the change of generation becomes problematic in managing the company. And last but not least, irrespective of what's the root cause of the difficulties, I think if the warning signs are not really taken as such, but there is more or less a blind eye to it, then it gets really complicated because relevant and very precious time is lost. And finally, you stand there with very scarce liquidity, basically no funds left, and also so no possibilities left to restructure. And that's then the first pass before insolvency.
And what is important when you are dealing with restructuring?
I would always say a successful restructuring needs 3 elements. First, you have to have a strategy, a different strategy going forward. You need the funds, the money to implement the strategy. And in many cases, you need a new management. So if you advise the struggling company, the debtor, as we say, the company in distress, you need to have a willingness of the management to follow a new path. And in advising a company, for me, it's extremely important that at the very first start in a mandate, I get a good understanding of the facts, of the business model the company is running, of the financial planning. Cash, again, is king, so I need to have a good understanding of the cash planning. And then if you want to do a restructuring, you always need stakeholders like owners, creditors to buy in, as we say. So they need to make sacrifices, and they need to understand why they should do sacrifices. So what we typically do in order to achieve this goal is that together with management, together with financial advisors, we as the lawyers, advisors, we try to come up with business plans for different scenarios so that we show what would happen, what would be the financial outcome in case of a bankruptcy, what's the better financial outcome in case of a restructuring, so that the creditors then really can see, and the owners, it's worthwhile to make this sacrifice going forward because ultimately I get more.
Yeah, understandably. The image of lawyers is still strong male-dominated. Do you see a change in that, or is everything still the same?
I think I do see a change. When I started 20 years ago, the number of female partners, for example, in business law firms was certainly smaller than it is today. But it's still a way to go, that's no question. And I think law firms like Wenger Plattner as well, we need to follow the path we are on in the sense that we have to offer flexible working models with part-time, with possibilities to work from home, to work at different times. That's very important. I think we also need, in addition to partnership, we need to provide for more experienced lawyers with very specialized skills, different positions like counsel, so where they do not have the full economic responsibility, but still have a different role than a more junior associate. And we need to provide a setting where they can fit in as good as possible. Apart from that, I think being a lawyer for a longer time and then also having a more senior position is a very demanding task because you have to combine several aspects. It's providing good work for the clients, it's getting new clients, it's internal management functions, it's educating and helping more junior associates to also make their path. So that's a very demanding job. Me personally, I had a kind of a reverse role model and still have at home. So my husband is working less than I do and always supported me very much in what I do. That doesn't need to be the role model, but it should also be one of the models which is possible. And I think as a firm, you just have to make sure that you provide a setting which is flexible enough for all different types of models, and not only for female, but for male as well. And that's what we try, but I think it's always a step to follow. It's a long way
but
to follow.
It changed over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
okay, I understand. So. What makes a good lawyer in general then?
In my eyes, it's a good combination of really a passion for the job you do. Passion, you need to love your work. At least in 80% of the cases. You need to love what you do, and that's also something which the client need to understand. Good analytical skills, because you really have to analyze the facts. You have to understand the setting you are in. Then I think you have to be creative. You do not just have to see the problems, you have to come up with creative solutions. And I think that if you have a combination of all these factors, that gives a good solution for the client.
But studying law is still tough.
Studying law is the first step, but I think afterwards a lot comes in addition.
Does it get easier?
It gets easier in the sense that the more experience you have, I think the easier it is to provide advice, in particular if time is short, because then you don't have the time to study a lot. You need a little bit to know where the path goes without study a lot, so that makes it easier, yes.
Okay. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the stock market went into a tailspin, and the whole world expected an economic collapse, but that didn't happen. and neither did the bankruptcies. Did you expect that outcome at the beginning of the corona pandemic?
I think what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic is that governments were very forthcoming with helping and providing financial support to the companies.
Is that good? Or was it bad?
That's just something we saw. Yeah. And based on that, I remember well, I had to do the business plan for our team just at the start of the pandemic. And my perception was that it will be a downturn of formal insolvency proceedings. That's actually what happened later on, because I thought if government is providing funds quite in a significant scale, that will have exactly the effect which it had. Whether I find it good or not, I think it's a political question ultimately on how you see it. My personal view is that in the case of the pandemic, I felt it's right that the government provides support because the government prohibited businesses to carry out specific work. So it was quite an intervention in the market. And if you are not allowed to do the business you would normally be able to do in normal circumstances, I think it's adequate if the government provides support. My understanding of the situation in Switzerland at that time was that the help was quite pragmatic, and one really wanted to help fast. And this also had the effect that companies who were already in difficulties before the pandemic got some funds as well. Now we see a little bit an increase again of the number of insolvencies, formal insolvencies, bankruptcies, and that's kind of a little bit of what of the bankruptcies which didn't happen during the pandemic. So
it's like the aftermath.
It's the aftermath a little bit, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So what advice do you have for young founders starting a startup? Not getting into
in a startup, I think what is very obvious for a new founder is that he has to follow his business idea, his invention. What is perhaps less obvious, but what should also not be fully neglected at the beginning, is to give this new business, this new invention, a good setting. Also in terms of cooperation, in terms of financial planning, that in my eyes is very important, because for a startup to be successful in the long run, they always need quite a lot of funds. And so the financial planning makes sure that if you want to implement the new idea, you have sufficient funds, or you at least recognize early enough in the process that you need additional funds. You can go to investors, provide them with a good financial planning. It's absolutely key.
So money is king again.
Money is very much king, also in cases of startups.
Thank you very much.